The crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the ballroom of the Riverside Grand Hotel, where 300 guests in evening were mingled beneath vaulted ceilings. I adjusted my bow tie and watched my wife from across the room, admiring how her emerald dress complemented her confidence as she laughed with colleagues from her marketing firm. These corporate galas were her world, not mine, but I attended because she mattered more than my discomfort in crowds. I worked in cybersecurity. Specifically, I consulted for firms that needed their digital infrastructure hardened against threats. My days involved penetration testing, vulnerability assessments, and occasionally teaching executives why their passwords shouldn't be password 123. Tonight, I was simply a supportive spouse, nursing a glass of mediocre champagne and making small talk about quarterly earnings with people whose names I'd forget by morning. My wife had been excited about this event for weeks. Her firm had landed a major pharmaceutical account, and tonight's celebration doubled as a networking opportunity. She'd pointed out several key players earlier: the CEO with the booming laugh, the CFO who collected vintage cars, and Richard Thornburg, the vice president of operations who supposedly held the real power in the organization. Thornburg stood near the bar now, a man in his early 50s with silver-streaked hair and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to deference, the kind of executive who spoke and expected the world to rearrange itself accordingly. I'd noticed him watching my wife during the cocktail hour, his gaze lingering a moment too long. I dismissed it initially. My wife was beautiful and accomplished. People noticed her. But there was something predatory in Thornburg's attention that made my instincts prickle. The evening progressed through dinner, rubber chicken and asparagus that had surrendered all structural integrity. Speeches followed, the CEO praising innovation and synergy while guests scrolled through phones beneath the tables. My wife excused herself to use the restroom, and I checked my email, half listening to a sales director explain his golf handicap. When I looked up, I saw Thornburg intercept my wife near the hallway leading to the restrooms. They stood partially obscured by an elaborate floral arrangement, but I could see his body language, leaning in too close, his hand reaching toward her arm. My wife stepped back, her smile polite but strained, and said something I couldn't hear. Thornburg laughed and moved closer. Then his hand dropped to her waist. I was moving before conscious thought caught up, weaving between tables and sidestepping a waiter with practiced efficiency. But before I'd crossed half the distance, my wife had already handled it. She removed his hand firmly and stepped away, her expression professional but ice-cold. She said something that made Thornburg's smile falter before she continued toward the restroom. I intercepted Thornburg instead. "Evening," I said pleasantly. "Richard Thornburg, isn't it?" He turned, assessing me with the casual dismissiveness of someone who categorized people by their usefulness. "That's right. And you are her husband." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "I noticed you having a conversation with my wife just now." Thornburg's expression shifted subtly, not quite embarrassment, more annoyance at being caught. "Just friendly networking," he said smoothly. "Your wife's work on the Davidson campaign was impressive. I was offering congratulations." By touching her waist. My voice remained conversational, but something in my tone made him recalculate. "You're misreading the situation," he said, his voice hardening. "I suggest you don't make a scene at your wife's company event. It wouldn't reflect well on her career prospects." The threat was unmistakable. And in that moment, watching this arrogant predator smile at me with complete confidence in his untouchability, something cold and calculating settled into my chest. Men like Thornburg operated with impunity because they believed themselves beyond consequences. They'd cultivated networks, leveraged power, and learned that HR departments protected the company, not the victims. But every system had vulnerabilities. Every fortress had weak points. "You're right," I said finally. "No scene needed. Enjoy your evening." I turned and walked back toward my table, my mind already working through possibilities. When my wife returned, I squeezed her hand and asked if she was all right. She nodded, clearly uncomfortable but trying to move past it. "He's drunk and inappropriate," she whispered. "Not the first time, according to others. But he's untouchable here." "Maybe," I said quietly. The word hung between us as I watched Thornburg rejoin his group, laughing at some joke, completely unconcerned. He'd placed his laptop bag on a chair at his table, a common sight at these events where executives showed off by working even during celebrations. And that's when the plan began forming. The gala continued around us with forced joviality. My wife tried to engage with her colleagues, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Thornburg had poisoned her evening, and he was across the room sipping bourbon, entirely unbothered. The injustice of it gnawed at me. "I'm going to get some air," I told my wife. She nodded, grateful for a moment alone with her work friends. I kissed her cheek and made my way toward the terrace, but my route took me past Thornburg's table. His laptop bag sat unattended, expensive leather with brass fittings. The table had 8 seats, but currently only 3 were occupied. Junior executives engaged in animated discussion about market penetration strategies. No one paid attention to the bag or to me as I passed. I continued to the terrace, where cold November air cleared my head. I wasn't an impulsive person. My profession required methodical thinking, careful planning, and understanding consequences. What I was contemplating could have serious legal ramifications if executed poorly. But it could also be entirely legal if done correctly. Corporate executives were notoriously lax about cybersecurity. They demanded their IT departments implement draconian security measures while they themselves used simple passwords, clicked phishing links, and left devices unsecured. I'd made a career partly from cleaning up the messes created by executive carelessness. The question was whether Thornburg was equally careless. I returned inside and positioned myself near the bar with a clear sightline to his table. I ordered a club soda and observed. Thornburg held court with a group of sycophants, his voice carrying across the room as he told some story involving a yacht and a celebrity whose name he dropped with practiced casualness. His body language screamed entitlement, the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. 20 minutes later, opportunity arrived. The lights dimmed for another round of speeches, this time featuring the CFO discussing quarterly performance. Thornburg excused himself from his group and headed toward the restrooms. His laptop bag remained at the table, now completely unattended as his companions turned their attention to the presentation. I waited 60 seconds, then moved. Walking with purpose, I crossed to his table as if I belonged there. No one challenged me. Corporate events operated on assumptions. If you acted like you had legitimate business somewhere, people assumed you did. I reached the chair, lifted the bag by its handle, and continued walking toward the hallway as if I'd been sent to retrieve it. My heart hammered, but my expression remained neutral. I passed a security guard who didn't give me a second glance. In the quiet hallway, I found an alcove near the coat check and opened the bag. The laptop was inside, along with file folders, business cards, and a phone charger. The device was a high-end model, probably equipped with full disk encryption and requiring both a password and potentially two-factor authentication to access. If I tried to boot it and failed, I'd have to return it with nothing accomplished except elevating my risk. But that wasn't my plan. I pulled out my phone and photographed the laptop's asset tag and serial number. Then I inspected the exterior more carefully. There, on the bottom panel, beneath a warranty sticker that had been partially peeled back. Someone had opened this laptop recently, and not through official IT channels. The security screws showed scratches indicating amateur work. Interesting. I also noticed something else, a small adhesive note tucked inside the bag's interior pocket, the kind executives used for quick reminders. This one had a string of characters, RT 2024 admin, followed by what looked like a server address. Executives loved reusing passwords across multiple systems. They also loved writing them down because they couldn't remember them otherwise. If this was Thornburg's admin password for the company network, I wouldn't need to access his laptop directly at all. I photographed the note, replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, and returned the bag to his table. The entire operation had taken less than 3 minutes. No one noticed me set the bag down and walk away. I found my wife again. She'd relaxed slightly, surrounded by friendly colleagues who were complaining about the dry chicken. "Feel better?" she asked. "Much better," I said truthfully. The gala wound down over the next hour. Awards were presented, final toasts made. My wife said her goodbyes while I retrieved our coats. As we waited for the valet to bring our car around, I saw Thornburg emerge with his entourage, laughing loudly at his own joke. He collected his bag from someone who'd retrieved it, never noticing anything amiss. In the car, my wife was quiet. "I should report him to HR," she said finally. "But you know how these things go. He'll deny it, I'll be labeled a troublemaker, and nothing will change. He's done this before, to others. Everyone knows, but he's untouchable." "Maybe not," I said softly. She looked at me curiously, but I focused on driving. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning what came next. When we arrived home, I kissed my wife goodnight and told her I had some work to finish. She headed upstairs while I went to my home office, a converted bedroom filled with monitors, servers, and equipment most people wouldn't recognize. I booted up my most secure workstation, routing everything through VPN chains and air-gapped systems. Then I began researching Richard Thornburg. And what I found made me smile coldly. Because men like Thornburg always had secrets. The first rule of digital investigation is to leave no traces. I wasn't hacking Thornburg's systems, not yet, but I needed to understand his digital footprint before deciding how to proceed. Everything I did tonight had to be legal or exist in grey areas defensible in court. I wasn't a vigilante. I was someone exercising lawful access to information that should never have been exposed in the first place. I started with open-source intelligence gathering. Social media profiles, LinkedIn connections, professional associations, public records. Thornburg maintained a carefully curated online presence, photos from charity galas, articles about his business acumen, testimonials from colleagues. But social media also revealed patterns, frequent posts from expensive restaurants, luxury vacations, a lifestyle that seemed excessive even for a VP-level salary. I dug deeper into public financial records. Corporate filings showed Thornburg's compensation, which was substantial but not enough to support the lifestyle his social media suggested. Either he came from family wealth, a quick genealogy search suggested otherwise, or he had additional income streams. Next, I examined the company's network architecture. This was where my professional knowledge became invaluable. Most corporations had external-facing systems that could be analyzed without illegal access: email servers, VPN gateways, client portals. Using standard network reconnaissance tools available to any security professional, I mapped the company's infrastructure. What I found was troubling. Their security was mediocre at best, outdated protocols, unpatched systems, and configurations that suggested minimal IT investment despite the company's size. For a security professional, this was like finding a fortress with ornate gates but crumbling walls. I returned to the password I'd photographed, RT2024 admin, combined with what looked like a remote access server address. If Thornburg used this password for remote access, and if he'd reused it elsewhere, I might not need to compromise anything. I'd simply be accessing systems with valid credentials that had been carelessly exposed. But using someone else's credentials was legally complicated. I needed another approach. I shifted focus to the company's public-facing systems. Many corporations maintained client portals, vendor access points, or employee services that faced the internet. I ran automated vulnerability scanners, completely legal when targeting your own systems or in security research contexts, and discovered several concerning issues. Their employee portal had an SQL injection vulnerability. Their VPN used deprecated encryption. Most interesting, their document management system had a misconfiguration that exposed directory listings without proper authentication. This last vulnerability was the key. By navigating through predictable URL patterns, I could see file names and folder structures without technically accessing the files themselves. It was like looking through someone's window from the street, not illegal, but revealing. The directory structure showed typical corporate folders: HR, finance, legal, operations. Under Thornburg's name, I found something unusual: a folder labeled private_consulting with dozens of files dated over the past 2 years. Why would a corporate VP maintain private consulting files on company servers? I couldn't access the files themselves without proper authorization, but the file names were visible: medtech_memo PDF, proprietary_search_sale XLSX, competitive_bid_advance_notice.doc. Each file name suggested activities that would be questionable at best, illegal at worst. Senior executives selling confidential information, using their positions to conduct private consulting that competed with their employers' interests. Potential insider trading if those stock-related file names meant what I suspected. I leaned back in my chair, mind racing. If Thornburg was conducting illegal activities using company resources, that changed everything. I wouldn't be exposing personal indiscretions. I'd be reporting actual corporate crimes. But I needed proof, and that meant obtaining those files legally. I considered options. Anonymous tips to the company's IT security would likely go nowhere. Internal teams often ignored external warnings, assuming them to be false positives or attacks. Law enforcement required substantial evidence before investigating white-collar crime. Regulatory agencies moved slowly unless presented with irrefutable documentation. What I needed was someone with both authority and motivation to investigate. I needed to make it impossible for the company to ignore what Thornburg had done. An idea began forming. Corporate whistleblower protections had strengthened significantly in recent years. If I could document the security vulnerability and report it through proper channels, the company would be legally obligated to investigate. And if that investigation revealed Thornburg's activities, they'd have no choice but to act. I drafted a detailed security vulnerability report, documenting the SQL injection, the deprecated VPN encryption, and the misconfigured document management system. I included specific technical details that only a legitimate security researcher would know, establishing credibility. I noted the existence of the exposed directories without claiming to have accessed the files themselves. Then I did something that would prove crucial. I included timestamps proving these vulnerabilities had existed for months, creating a timeline that would prompt questions about why IT security hadn't caught them. This would trigger an internal audit. I prepared the report for submission to the company's security team, their general counsel, and their audit committee, a shotgun approach ensuring multiple parties would see it. I'd send it through anonymous channels that couldn't be traced back to me, but with enough technical detail to prove legitimacy. But timing mattered. If I sent this now, the investigation might take weeks. Thornburg would have time to cover his tracks, delete evidence, and lawyer up. I needed something more immediate, something that would force action tonight. That's when I remembered something from my wife's earlier conversation. The company had federal contracts. If Thornburg was conducting private consulting or selling proprietary information while working on federally funded projects, that wasn't just corporate malfeasance, it was federal crime. I pulled up the company's contract listings from public procurement databases. There it was, a $15 million contract with the Department of Defense for pharmaceutical research. Thornburg's name appeared in the contract documentation as a key personnel member. If he was selling proprietary information from federally funded research, that was felony theft of government property, potential espionage charges, and a dozen other federal violations that would have FBI agents showing up with warrants. I refined my report, now explicitly noting the federal contract connection and the potential national security implications of the exposed documents. This wasn't hyperbole. Pharmaceutical research contracts often involved sensitive information that foreign governments or competitors would pay substantially to obtain. I prepared multiple versions of the report, one for the company's security team, one for their general counsel, one for the Department of Defense Inspector General, and one for the FBI's white-collar crime division. Then I encrypted everything, routed it through multiple anonymous services, and set up delayed delivery. The reports would go out in 2 hours, giving me time to ensure I'd left no traces. My wife appeared in the doorway, wearing her robe. "It's 2 in the morning. Come to bed." I looked at the clock, surprised. Hours had vanished while I'd worked. Just finishing up something important. She walked over and kissed the top of my head. "You're being mysterious." "I'm ensuring bad people face appropriate consequences," I said. She studied my face. "Does this have anything to do with Thornburg?" "Everything to do with him," I admitted. "But I'm doing this the right way. Legally, carefully, and permanently." She sat on the edge of my desk. "Tell me." So I did, explaining what I'd found and what I was about to do. Her expression shifted from surprise to grim satisfaction. "He's been doing this for years. Others have tried reporting him, but nothing ever sticks. He's got friends in senior management. He won't have friends in federal law enforcement, I said. And that's who'll be investigating by morning. I sent the reports at 4 in the morning, using carefully constructed anonymous channels that would preserve my identity while establishing credibility. The corporate security team would receive theirs first, triggering immediate review protocols. The legal department's copy would arrive 30 minutes later. The federal agencies would get theirs an hour after that, ensuring the company couldn't bury the evidence before authorities became involved. Then I eliminated all traces of my evening's work. Digital forensics would find nothing on my systems connecting me to the reports. I'd been careful, methodical, and had left no exploitable trail. My wife and I managed a few hours of sleep before morning. Over breakfast, she seemed lighter, as if sharing the burden had helped. "Do you think it'll actually work?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. Federal agencies don't ignore potential national security breaches. And companies don't ignore federal agencies. She left for work around 8, nervous but determined to act normally. I worked from home, as usual, monitoring news feeds and the company's public communications while pretending to focus on a client project. The first indication came at 9:30. A former colleague who still worked in corporate security consulting sent me a message. "Did you see this? Major pharma company just went into emergency security lockdown. FBI showed up with warrants." I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. The machinery had started moving. By 10 o'clock, news outlets were reporting that federal authorities had executed search warrants at the pharmaceutical company's headquarters, focusing on potential theft of proprietary information from government-contracted research. The company's stock dropped 3% within minutes. My wife texted, "Something's happening. FBI agents in the building. Thornburg's office is sealed off." I replied simply, "Stay calm. Do your work. This has nothing to do with you." Over the next hours, details emerged in fragments. The company had received a comprehensive security vulnerability report early that morning, triggering their incident response protocols. While their security team had been assessing the findings, federal agents had arrived with warrants based on separate tips provided to the FBI and the Department of Defense Inspector General. The warrants focused specifically on Richard Thornburg's activities. Agents had seized his company laptop, his desktop computer, and boxes of files from his office. They'd also detained him for questioning, not arrested, the news carefully noted, but definitely not free to leave. By early afternoon, the company issued a statement. Richard Thornburg had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation of serious allegations. They expressed full cooperation with federal authorities and emphasized their commitment to security and legal compliance. My wife called during her lunch break. "It's chaos here," she said, voice shaking with suppressed emotion. Thornburg was escorted out by FBI agents. They took everything from his office. HR is interviewing everyone who worked with him. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. Other women are coming forward now, saying he'd been inappropriate with them too. It's like everyone suddenly feels safe enough to speak up." She paused. Did you have anything to do with this?" "I reported legitimate security vulnerabilities through appropriate channels," I said carefully. "What the FBI found was already there. I just made sure the right people looked." "Thank you," she whispered. By evening, the investigation's scope had expanded. Financial news outlets reported that Thornburg was suspected of conducting unauthorized private consulting, selling confidential pharmaceutical research to competitors, and potentially engaging in insider trading based on information obtained through his position. Each allegation carried serious legal consequences. The company's general counsel issued another statement announcing a comprehensive internal investigation and the retention of outside law firms to conduct independent reviews. They'd also engaged cybersecurity consultants, my former colleagues, to assess their systems. The message was clear: they were taking this seriously and heads would roll. I received calls from several former colleagues who were now working on the company's incident response. They wanted my expertise on certain technical aspects. I carefully provided information about the vulnerabilities I'd documented in my anonymous report, framing it as standard security assessment knowledge that any professional would recognize. "This is a nightmare for them," one colleague told me. The FBI found evidence of systematic information selling going back years. Thornburg was running a wholesale business selling proprietary research to foreign pharmaceutical companies. We're talking millions in illicit income. What about the federal contracts? That's the big one. He sold information from DoD-funded research to overseas entities. That's not just corporate espionage, it's potential violations of export control laws, theft of government property, maybe even economic espionage charges. He's looking at decades in federal prison. I felt no sympathy. Men like Thornburg destroyed lives casually, operating with impunity until someone held them accountable. He'd touched my wife inappropriately because he believed himself untouchable. Now he'd learn otherwise. Over the following days, more details emerged. Thornburg had maintained encrypted files on company servers, files he'd thought were secure but which federal forensic analysts had cracked. These files contained years of correspondence with competitors, contracts for information sales, and spreadsheets tracking his illegal income. His arrogance had been his downfall. He'd conducted criminal activities using company resources, believing corporate IT security wouldn't notice and that senior management would protect him even if they did. He'd never considered that federal agencies had resources and authority beyond corporate control. The company fired him immediately once the evidence became clear. Their statement emphasized they'd had no knowledge of his activities and were cooperating fully with authorities. Several other executives who'd failed to act on earlier complaints about Thornburg's behavior were also terminated or demoted. My wife came home 2 weeks after the gala with news. She'd been promoted. "They're cleaning house," she explained. "Getting rid of everyone who enabled toxic behavior. They asked me to help lead the culture change initiative." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "The other women who complained about Thornburg are coming forward publicly now. We're organizing to push for stronger harassment policies across the industry." She looked at me seriously. "What you did, exposing him, it gave us all permission to speak up. We're not afraid anymore." "I just documented security vulnerabilities," I said. "Federal investigators found the criminal activity." She smiled. "Right. Just security vulnerabilities." That night, we learned that Thornburg had been formally indicted on multiple federal charges: theft of trade secrets, wire fraud, violation of export control laws, and conspiracy. Prosecutors were seeking a plea agreement but indicated they'd pursue maximum sentences if he refused to cooperate. His career was over. His reputation destroyed. His illegal fortune would be seized through asset forfeiture. And he faced potentially 20 years in federal prison. All because he'd made a mistake that powerful men often made. He'd believed himself immune to consequences. I thought about that moment at the gala when he'd threatened my wife's career if I made a scene. He'd calculated that his position protected him, that corporate politics would shield his behavior, that nothing I could do would threaten his comfortable existence. He'd been wrong. 3 months after the gala, Richard Thornburg accepted a plea agreement. The details were reported in business publications with the kind of schadenfreude reserved for fallen executives. 12 years in federal prison, $4.3 million in restitution, and permanent debarment from working on federal contracts. The prosecutors had been thorough, documenting every illegal transaction, every sold secret, every violation of trust. But the consequences extended far beyond one man's imprisonment. The pharmaceutical company underwent a complete restructuring. Their CEO resigned under pressure from the board, replaced by someone committed to cultural reform. They implemented comprehensive ethics training, created independent reporting channels for misconduct, and hired entirely new security leadership. My former colleagues who'd worked on the incident response told me the company had spent millions upgrading systems and protocols. More importantly, they'd changed how they treated people. The protection that powerful men like Thornburg had enjoyed evaporated. Several other executives were fired during the internal investigation when their own misconduct came to light. The message was clear: status wouldn't protect predatory behavior anymore. My wife thrived in her new role. She'd become a voice for workplace safety and ethics, speaking at industry conferences and consulting with other companies on cultural transformation. The experience had been traumatic, but she'd channeled it into meaningful change. Other women reached out to her, sharing their own stories, finding courage in her example. "I've been thinking about that night," she told me one evening as we sat on our porch watching the sunset. "How different things could have been if you hadn't acted. Thornburg would still be out there, harassing women, selling secrets, operating like he was invincible." "Someone would have caught him eventually," I said. "Maybe. But probably not. People like him are careful. They've got systems, protection, plausible deniability." She turned to face me. "You didn't just expose him. You dismantled the entire structure that enabled him." I'd never told her the complete details of what I'd done that night, the methodical investigation, the careful documentation, the strategic timing of reports to maximize impact. She knew I'd reported security vulnerabilities, but not the full extent of my preparation and planning. "I did what needed to be done," I said simply. "Men like Thornburg operate because good people don't act. They count on bystanders staying silent, on systems protecting status over truth, on consequences never arriving." "But consequences did arrive," she said. "Because of you." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. I thought about that moment at the gala when Thornburg had touched my wife, his expression full of smug confidence that nothing would happen to him. I thought about his threat regarding her career, his assumption that power made him untouchable. Power hadn't protected him. The law hadn't initially cared. Corporate structures had been designed to shield him. But information, properly documented and delivered to the right people at the right time, had been stronger than all his advantages. My phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Former pharmaceutical executive Thornburg begins prison sentence." The article included details about the federal facility where he'd serve his time, the restrictions on his future employment, and the impact his crimes had on the industry. I showed my wife, who read it with grim satisfaction. 12 years, she said. "He'll be almost 70 when he gets out." "If he serves the full sentence," I noted. "Federal time doesn't have parole, but there's good behavior credits." Still, his career is over, his reputation destroyed, his illegal money gone. She looked at me. "Do you think he knows it was you?" "No. And it doesn't matter. This wasn't personal revenge, it was about justice. About ensuring that someone who'd committed serious crimes faced appropriate consequences." That was true, mostly. I wouldn't pretend I hadn't felt satisfaction watching Thornburg's world collapse. But my motivation had been bigger than personal vendetta. His crimes had been real, his victims numerous, and his prosecution necessary. In the months since, I'd thought often about the ethics of what I'd done. I hadn't hacked systems illegally. I hadn't fabricated evidence. I hadn't violated any laws in my investigation. I'd simply documented vulnerabilities that already existed, reported them through appropriate channels, and ensured that evidence of crimes reached people with authority to act. Some might argue I'd overstepped, that I'd taken justice into my own hands. But I disagreed. I'd empowered the justice system to function properly. I'd removed obstacles that had prevented appropriate authorities from discovering criminal activity. I'd been a catalyst, not a vigilante. My wife interrupted my thoughts. "I heard something interesting at work today." The FBI agent who led the investigation gave a presentation about corporate security. He said their case started with an anonymous tip, one of the most detailed and professionally prepared reports they'd ever received. He said whoever submitted it understood both cybersecurity and federal law intimately. "Sounds like someone competent," I said neutrally. She smiled. He said the tipster had probably saved them months of investigation, maybe prevented additional crimes. They never identified who sent it, but he wanted to thank them publicly. I'm sure they appreciated the acknowledgement. The agent also said something else. He said that in cases like this, the difference between justice and injustice often comes down to whether one person decides to act. Whether someone with knowledge and capability chooses to stay silent or speak up. I met her eyes. He's right. Evil succeeds when good people do nothing. "And you're one of the good people," she said softly. We went inside as night fell completely. Life had returned to normal rhythms: work, meals, quiet evenings at home. But something had changed for both of us. My wife had reclaimed her confidence and found purpose in advocacy. I'd learned that my skills, applied carefully and ethically, could protect people beyond just securing their networks. In my office that night, I reviewed the news coverage one final time. Thornburg's case had prompted congressional hearings about corporate espionage, new regulations on federal contractor oversight, and industry-wide reforms in pharmaceutical research security. The ripple effects extended far beyond one man's crimes. I closed the browser and shut down my systems. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new projects, new problems requiring solutions. But tonight, I allowed myself satisfaction in work well done. Justice had been slow to arrive for Thornburg, delayed by structures designed to protect powerful people from consequences. But it had arrived, thorough and final, because information properly gathered and strategically delivered had proven stronger than institutional protection. I'd touched his career the way he'd touched my wife, uninvited, unwelcome, and with permanent consequences. The difference was that my actions had been lawful, measured, and justified. He'd ended his own career the moment he'd committed his first crime. I'd simply ensured the ending came swiftly rather than after more victims suffered. My wife called from upstairs, and I went to join her. The Thornburg chapter was closed. Life continued, better for his absence, safer for his imprisonment, and improved by the reforms his exposure had forced. Sometimes justice required patience. Sometimes it required courage. Sometimes it required someone with specific knowledge and skills deciding that silence wasn't acceptable. That night at the gala, when Richard Thornburg had smirked at me and threatened my wife's career, he'd made a fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed I was just another bystander who'd accept the status quo. He'd never considered that some people possessed both the capability and the determination to ensure powerful men faced consequences. He knew better now. And so did everyone else who'd watched his fall.